It all started when Darwin was nominated to be the naturalist on the British Admiralty's grand voyage on the Beagle. The HMS Beagle is a 90-foot survey ship that would take them on what turned out to be a 5-year voyage circumnavigating the globe, starting from England in December of 1831 and crossing the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans and stopping at 4 of the 7 continents. As a naturalist, Darwin's job was to observe and collect specimens of plants, animals, rocks, and fossils. During the long voyage, Darwin made many observations that helped him form his theory of evolution. For one, he visited tropical rainforests, for instance in Brazil, in February 1832, where he saw plants and animals he had never seen before, which gave him insight into the diversity of life. Later on in the journey, when the Beagle was surveying the coast of Chile in February of 1835, Darwin experienced an earthquake which resulted in the ocean floor being lifted above sea level. He found rocks containing fossil seashells in mountains high above sea level as well. Darwin determined that this suggested that continents and oceans change over time. Then came his famous exploration of the Galapagos Islands, which were reached in September 1835. He only spent 5 weeks on the Galapagos and only visited 4 of the 16 small islands, yet it was here that Darwin's theory really started to come together through the numerous differences between the animals, flora, and fauna on each of the islands. It's important to note that individual Galapagos Islands differ from one another in important ways, such as some are rocky and dry, while others have better soil and more rainfall. Darwin noticed that the plants and animals on the different islands also differed. For example, the giant tortoises on one island had saddle-shaped shells, while those on another island had dome-shaped shells. Essentially, you could distinguish which tortoise came from which island just by looking at its shell. This started Darwin's thinking about the origin of species. He wondered how each island came to have its own type of tortoise. When he arrived home in 1836, Darwin immediately began to research and piece his ideas together. Darwin hit upon the idea of natural selection, which combined his knowledge of variation and inheritance with his readings of Malthus's essays stating that more organisms are born each generation than can possibly survive and reproduce. Essentially, the organisms with the heritable variations that make them best suited for surviving are the most likely to produce offspring and to pass on their recipe for success to succeeding generations. When environments change, different variants will be favored and evolutionary change will occur. These new ideas made his observation on his trip make sense. For example, finches on the different Galapagos Islands had a differently shaped beak on each island. This can be explained through natural selection. For instance, one island contained large seeds, and thus the finches with the more desirable trait for that, large beaks, survived and passed down the trait until all of the finches on the island had the gene for large beaks. Through his observations on the voyage, he was able to piece together his ideas, which led him to a complete theory by 1839. 20 years later, he published his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. This ignited the study of evolutionary biology and led to the concepts we have today.